EDM 60204, Measurement and Geometry, Week 13, Developing Lesson Plan and Scheme of Work. We will be covering these two topics, Developing Lesson Plan and Developing Scheme of Work. So the lesson objectives, at the end of this lesson, you should be able to define what is lesson plan and explain what lesson plan is in terms of phases of learning and explain the role of assessment. Let's have a look at the first LO, which is define what is lesson plan. Now, a lesson plan can be a piece of paper or template or digital template where educators write down in black and white the pedagogy for their daily lessons. Pedagogy means how you teach. It's the teaching method that you use. Now, it also includes prior knowledge, measurable learning outcomes, and materials and resources that you use. Now, a lesson plan template can be divided into three sections, readiness, mastery, and engagement, and we are referring to the Singapore Primary Math Curriculum 2013. Assessment, on the other hand, is also a part of a lesson plan. Why does a teacher need to plan his or her lesson? Now, number one, or A, it is to align the subject learning outcomes for that particular grade year. That means the subject learning outcomes, the LO, must be suitable for the grade year. That means if the grade year is year 3 and this is 9-year-olds, so the LO will fit this. Okay, and the other one is to ensure teaching standard is adhered to. Yes, we do have a teaching standard which all of us need to follow and abide. And then to hold teachers accountable for the teaching method they use. So if it is not recorded, then the teacher might not be able to produce evidence that he or she had learned and do or teach using, let's say, flipped classroom. So there must be evidence. The other one is to ensure quality teaching and quality teachers are hired. Now, there are out there those who are not qualified to teach and they don't have the qualification. Sometimes they do have the qualification, but they are not fit to teach. Okay, so a school will have to decide whether they are hiring the best teacher with the best qualification in teaching. Okay, next, for confirmation purposes. Now, this is when you are already a teacher and you need to be confirmed as a full-time staff. So when you start as a probationary teacher. So it could be like 6 months or a year. And sometimes if you are not that good, they might want to extend to 2 years probation. But sometimes the school will ask you to leave and find another school to teach. Okay. Things like your teaching method is not the right one, your attitude as a teacher towards your students, or your attitude towards your colleagues. So all these, apart from your qualification, plays an important role in you securing a job as a teacher in schools. Now, the next one, promotion purposes. So once you are a teacher and there might be promotions in your department or in your school, you might want to go for it. So they will be looking at your lesson plan and how you teach and how you interact with the students and how you interact with your colleagues before they give you the promotion as evidence that teaching had taken place. So if you teach only using one method, then I don't think the school might want to keep you. But if, let's say, you use flipped classroom, you use inquiry-based learning, you use discovery learning, and so on and so forth, so schools might want to keep you because you are innovative and creative and you are passionate about your teaching job. The last one is as a reflection of a teacher's work. Being a teacher, you need to always reflect on your lesson. What did I do? Did I do it right? What went wrong? How am I going to make it right the next time? Or how will I teach differently the next round? The third one is what happens when the teacher teaches without a lesson plan. Okay, number one, there will be no accountability. So if the teacher does just teach without a lesson plan and he or she teach the wrong way, the wrong method, and the students are so bored, so there will be no accountability. The administrators of the school cannot see any evidence of that. No quality check. Every day, today, in this era, we always go for quality. Okay, you want to buy something, you want to go for quality. You want to put your children in the best school. Okay, you wouldn't want to put your children in a school where it is known for its low academic achievement, for example, or where the school itself is in shambles. And then it will be chaotic. Chaotic here means that the teacher will teach whatever that he or she wants, not following the syllabus. And at the end of the year, the children learn nothing. Okay, and then students won't know what they are learning. That is why in your lesson plan, it is very important for you to write the LO so that your LO is measurable. So all learning objectives, all learning outcomes must be measurable and also meaningful. Okay, so if you have forgotten how to write the LO so that it is measurable and meaningful, please refer to the other lecture videos. Next, there is no structure in the pedagogy. That means pedagogy is how you teach, the method that you use, the activities that you design. That means there's nothing. Okay, there is no structure. You just teach the way you want. Okay, so there will be no learning taking place. Okay, now let's look at how we explain what lesson plan is in terms of phases of learning. Now this is the phases of learning which I took from the article. Okay, and you can see that we start with readiness, number one, readiness, and then it goes like this to engagement, and then it goes here to mastery, and then it goes back up to readiness. So it is a circle. Okay, and all these three leads to learning. Remember that when you design a lesson plan or when you design an activity, it must lead to learning. Okay, it must lead to learning. It can be fun, it can be interactive, okay, but it must lead to learning. The students must learn the lesson that you plan for them or that you are teaching. Okay, not just having fun, but then they don't learn anything. So that's why we have the readiness, engagement, and mastery phase. Okay, let's look at the readiness phase of learning. So the first thing is that students must know what they are learning. Okay, so they need to know the LO at the beginning, okay, of the lesson. So you can have it at the beginning of readiness, or you finish the readiness and then you let them know what the lesson is about. Okay, so in the readiness phase of learning, teachers will prepare students so that they are ready to learn. In your presentation during the tutorial, one of the groups actually mentioned warm up. Okay, I like this term because yes, it's a warm up session, okay, before the lesson. So your students are ready mentally to receive whatever new stuff that they need to learn. Okay, now for readiness, there are three considerations. One is that you need to look into your students' prior knowledge. Number two will be the motivating context. And number three, learning environment. So this is actually taken from Singapore Primary Mathematics Curriculum 2000. Okay, so readiness, there are three phases of learning for readiness itself. One is prior knowledge, the other one is motivation context, and the third one is learning environment. So let's have a look at each one. So let's start with prior knowledge. Now, for students to be ready to learn, teachers need to know students' prior knowledge in relation to the new learning. So the new learning will be the new topic that you are going to teach. But before you start teaching, you need to know your students' prior knowledge or previous knowledge. So whether they have heard of the term, whether they have seen the 2D shapes or 3D shapes, whether they know how to describe the attributes or the properties of the 2D shapes or 3D shapes, whether they know how to measure using a ruler, and whether they have done it correctly. Okay, those are examples. Now, this requires knowing whether students have the prerequisite concepts and skills. So, like if you are teaching measurement and your students are supposed to use the ruler to measure, let's say, a book. So the skill is that they should know it must begin at 0 and not at the tip of the ruler. So those are that is an example of skills. Some form of diagnostic assessment is necessary to check that students are ready to learn. Now, diagnostic assessments could be like a short quiz, okay, or questions that you ask. So all these, etc. Okay, so all these actually points back to the students' prior knowledge. So if the students can answer the questions, that means they have the prior knowledge. If the students cannot answer the questions, that means they don't have the prior knowledge. What should you do if the students do not have the prior knowledge? So instead of beginning the new lesson, you should teach them or help them build that prior knowledge first. Okay, so that's why you need to know the syllabus from year 1 to year 6 for, let's say, mathematics, if you're teaching maths. So you should know at which year, grade year, that they had learned about 2D shapes and 3D shapes, or at which grade year that they had learned about measurements and using standard measurement tools. And how do they measure? What are the units that they had learned or used? Because if they had learned this in their lower primary, that means year 1, year 2, year 3, they should be able to remember once you actually sort of like revise with them on these topics. Only after that, then you go into your new lesson, because then it is still fresh in their mind what they had learned before, and then they can connect it to the new learning or the new lesson for that day. Now, the second part of readiness is motivating context. So, for students to get ready to learn, the teachers need to provide motivating context for learning. Now, this one should be developmentally appropriate. What do we mean by motivating context? Let's look at the example here. For younger students, the motivating context would be like stories, songs, even play-based activities such as games. Okay, for older students, it may be like something that is related to everyday life, something that they can see the relevance and meaningfulness of mathematics. Now, for the more advanced students, applications in other disciplines can serve as motivating learning. So, if you are teaching primary school kids, that means they are young students, and their motivating context would be like stories, okay, songs, play-based. Right, play-based activities such as games. Okay, that's why you can bring in videos with songs or audio with songs. Okay, the third one is learning environment. Now, shared roles will help promote respectful and emotionally safe interactions between teacher and students and among students that are necessary for productive and purposeful learning. Okay, the learning environment is actually your classroom. If this is a face-to-face environment, if it is online environment, it will be the child's home and room and his environment. Okay, so when in class, you should have what we call as the rules and regulations. Okay, on the very first day, state the rules and regulation of the class. For example, you should not fight with each other. Okay, you should not quarrel with each other. Okay, and so on and so forth. Now, establish procedures for organizing students and managing resources will also facilitate a smooth start and transitions during lessons. So, let's say they are going to go to another class, so they need to line up, okay, in twos, for example. And you know, kids sometimes when they line up, they are very chatty, so they'll be talking non-stop. Now, you have to tell them that when they are lining up, they have to keep quiet. Okay, and then you can use certain cues. Okay, like for example, I see you, and then they will say, you see me. Okay, so when you say I see you, they will reply by saying you see me, and then they have to keep quiet. Okay, these are what we call as cues. Clapping your hand, for example, 3 times. That should tell the students to quiet down. Okay, you don't yell at them. Don't yell. Okay, don't shout. These are very bad manners, and if they copy you, then at home they'll be shouting at their parents. So we don't want this kind of mannerism in the younger students. Okay, so use cues, clapping your hands, or part of a song, or something like, okay, eyes on me, and then they reply, the students reply, eyes on you, and then they quiet down. Okay, that is for readiness. Now we are into engagement. So what is engagement phase of learning? Now, this is the main phase of learning, Okay, I stress again, the main phase of learning is because this is where the activities will take place. The main learning activities will take place. Okay, so this is where teachers use a repertoire of pedagogies to engage students in learning new concepts and skills. So a repertoire of pedagogies referring to the learning theories. Okay, so the many learning theories that you have learned, you can choose 1, 2, or 3. And then the teaching strategies. Okay, the teaching strategies. And also, on top of that, you need to know your learner. Okay, you need to know your learners. Okay, whether they are fast learners, average learners, or they are academically challenged learners. Whether they are visual learners or auditory learners or kinesthetic learners. Okay, and then 3 pedagogical approaches form the spine that supports most of the mathematics instruction in the classroom. Spine here means backbone, which means very, very important. Okay, backbone, important. Alright, okay, so they are not mutually exclusive and could be used in different parts of a lesson or unit. So you can use them at the beginning of your lesson, or you could use them in the middle of your lesson, or you could use them at the end of the lesson. So for example here, the lesson or unit could start with an activity, okay, followed by teacher-led inquiry, and at the end, direct instruction. Okay, so you could use them in different parts. So the first one is activity-based learning. Okay, remember the 3 pedagogical approaches. So we are going to look at the 3 pedagogical approaches. Now this part here is an example of a lesson. So you can follow this if you want to, like activity first and then teacher-led inquiry and then direct instructions. But most of the time, you are free, okay, to choose your own methods. Alright, so the first one is called activity-based learning. So what is activity-based learning? So actually it is learning by doing. Okay, it's learning by doing because there's activity. So from the activity, the students will learn. Okay, it's the opposite of teacher-led learning, where you tell your students what they are supposed to learn. Okay, you tell your students about the attributes of a 3D solid, and then you give them exercise. So that is teacher-led or teacher-centered. But when you use activity-based, you give them the activities and they find out later what the attributes are. So the choice is yours. Alright, now it's particularly effective for teaching mathematical concepts and skills at primary and lower secondary levels. Okay, but also effective at higher levels as well. Now students engage in activities to explore and learn mathematical concepts and skills, individually or in groups. So you can have this activity as an individual activity, or it's going to be a group activity. Okay, but the main aim is for the students to explore and learn mathematical concepts. Okay, now they could use manipulatives, concrete items, or handouts and so on, or other resources to construct meaning and understanding. So as the students learn, they will make meaning on their own. They will then process it on their own. So if you actually, for example, you teach them, you need to use a long ruler to measure a table. Okay, so the student would then make your information, the information that they get from you, into words that they understand. So instead of using your words, you need to use long ruler to measure table, your table. They would see that a table, okay, a table is measured using long ruler. Can I use a measuring tape? Okay, so they will come up in their own way to make meaning, to understand what they had learned in your lesson, in your class. Similarly, when I tell you about all this information in engagement phase, when you make your own notes, you will then process it in another way. So each one of you will process the information you get from this video lecture differently. Now you have to remember, if you do that, your students will also be doing that. So we need to check on whether they are on the same page as us, even though they might state it in their own words, or they use different examples, but the main idea should be there. Okay, so from concrete manipulatives and experiences, students are guided to uncover abstract mathematical concepts or results. Okay. Alright, still activity-based learning. For example, to develop problem-solving skills, students investigate whether rectangles are the same, with the same perimeter can have different areas. Okay, so they will develop problem-solving skills when you give them a problem that they need to investigate. Meaning to say that you don't give the length, the width, and the height, but they need to find it out themselves. And this is activity-based learning. Okay, so students are given sheets of 1 centimeter square grids to draw and cut out different rectangles of a given perimeter, for example 12 centimeter. So the perimeter is 12 centimeter. Okay, so perimeter is 12 cm. Right, so you give them a graph paper, right, graph paper, where each side is 1 cm, this side is also 1 cm. Okay, so since it's 1 cm and 1 cm, they can draw the perimeter for 12 cm. Okay, so let's have a look at this example. Perimeter is 12 cm, so that means you need to count and draw the outline for a rectangle, that has the perimeter of 12 cm. So it could be, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so that means it could be okay, sorry about that sound. Alright, so it could be 1 cm over here, 1 cm over here, 5 cm over here, 5 cm over here. So 5 plus 5 plus 1 plus 1, it gives you the perimeter of 12 cm. Okay, then you can come up with another where the sides have different length. The sides have different length and different width. Okay, so let's say for example we have another one. Okay, so if this is 2 cm and this is 2 cm, okay, so the other one would be 4 cm and 4 cm. Okay, 4 plus 4 is 8, 8 plus 4 is 12. So that means the length and the width will be, one is 2 cm, the other one is 4 cm. Okay, so that means they can cut out different rectangles with different sides. Right, so then they will record the length, breadth, and area of each rectangle, and they have cut out on a record sheet. So questions will be passed for students to discuss during the activity, like for example, answering the question, how do you figure out the length and breadth of a rectangle? Breadth here means width. Okay, of a rectangle given its perimeter. So how do you come up with the length and the width? Okay, next question. What assumptions do you make about the length or breadth of the rectangle? Okay, so for example, that they are not of the same length and not of the same breadth, but their perimeter stays the same. Okay, students then explore different strategies and explain why the strategies work or do not work, and finally derive a conclusion as a team. So these are actually the steps in activity-based learning. Okay, these are the steps in activity-based learning. So during discussion, students are also encouraged to communicate their ideas using appropriate mathematical language. That's why it's important that you introduce the mathematical language as early as possible, like using sides and vertex, using edges and faces and vertices, centimeter, square centimeter, cubic centimeter, and so on. Okay, so that they can use the correct mathematical language when they explain things or occurrences or problem solving things. Okay, throughout the activity, the teacher will be observing and the students say and do what the students say and do, and constantly making the decision on the appropriate amount of feedback to be provided to them. So teachers, you must know how to give feedback. You must know how to give positive and constructive feedback to your students. You can't always say, good job, okay, fine, fantastic, awesome. You have to use more words, more descriptive words to be able to give and provide the correct feedback. Okay, teacher ends the activity by summarizing and highlighting some of the strategies that students use. So activity-based learning is not just students carry out the activity and just find out what they need. Okay, no, there are steps. So look back at steps from the very beginning for activity-based learning until the end. Okay, this is the second type of method, okay, which is teacher-directed inquiry. Teacher-directed inquiry. So this approach is about learning through guided inquiry. Instead of giving the answers, teachers lead students to explore and investigate and find answers on their own. So the students will actually learn to focus on specific questions and also ideas, and are engaged in communicating, explaining, and reflecting on their answers. Here, students need to be able to communicate. So it is encouraging them to become more confident with themselves and to enhance their communication skills. Okay, they also learn to pose questions. That means they also learn how to ask the correct question. Okay, process information and data and seek appropriate methods and solutions. This enhances the development of mathematical processes and 21st century competencies. Now, to check whether students understand the concept of, oh sorry, okay, so for example, in teaching the topic on symmetry, so teacher first shows two groups of shapes. Okay, there are two types of shapes. One is symmetric and one is non-symmetric shapes. Without introducing the concept of symmetry. So you don't tell them, today we're going to learn about symmetry. Okay, so before you tell them the learning objective, you give them this kind of activity first. Okay, so students are asked how the shapes are classified. Okay, for example, if you have symmetry and non-symmetry shapes, and then I just tell you, okay, how will you classify these shapes? So once you take a look at them and then you put them into those that looks awkward and those that look regular. Okay, and how one's group is different from the other. So you have to justify why is it that you put this awkward looking shape in the awkward looking box. Okay, and why is it the regular looking shape is in the regular looking box. Alright, then teacher tests the rule for classification suggested by the students. Alright, eventually teacher guides students to focus on the attributes, which will be the properties of symmetric shapes, and directs them to the concept of symmetry. So you will need to know first and foremost what are the attributes of something that is symmetric, and then you can then lead your students to find whether the shapes that they have classified are symmetric shapes or non-symmetric shapes. Now, to check whether students understand the concept of symmetry, a teacher gives students paper cutouts of symmetric and non-symmetric shapes and asks them to classify them in the same way. Okay, so a student can fold the shapes into halves and decide if they are symmetrical. Now, they also visualize how a line of symmetry divides a symmetric shape into halves that fit exactly over each other. So after you have discussed with them the attributes or the properties or the characteristics of symmetric shapes, then you give them, let's say, one or two pieces of paper or handout with different kinds of shapes. Ask them to cut it out, and after that come up with a test to see how the shape is symmetric or the shape is not symmetric. Okay, and then they need to explain, okay, I fold it into half this way and it fits very nicely over one another, or okay, I tried to draw a line of symmetry which is diagonal and it doesn't work, and so on and so forth. So that's the second one. The third one is direct instruction. Now, direct instruction, as the name suggests, is teacher-centered. Okay, so this is about explicit teaching. Teacher introduce, explain, and demonstrate new concept. So you are telling your students what they are going to learn directly. Okay, and what are the concepts and the skills that they are required to have. Okay, direct instruction is most effective when students are told what they will be learning and what they are expected to be able to do. And this helps them focus on the learning goals. Okay, learning goals here will be the LO, or the learning objective, or the learning outcome. So teacher will draw connections, pose questions, emphasize key concepts, and role modeling thinking. So holding students' attention is critical. That means you have to make sure that your students are attentive and they are not thinking about something else. Okay, because you are the center of the stage. That means you are the one who is talking and telling them what to learn, telling them which one is important, and telling them you need to focus on this. The students are at the receiving end, meaning that they only hear your voice and they are not talking to each other at that point. Okay, this could be, this is where your students might be falling off to sleep. Okay, stimuli such as videos, graphic images, real-world context, and even humor aid in maintaining a high-level attention. Aid here means help. Okay, so all these materials, graphic images, real-world context, for example, a newspaper. Okay, there is a news in the newspaper about a building that looks like a cone, for example. And even humor, that means jokes. Okay, jokes about geometry or jokes about measurement. All these are called stimuli, and these stimuli will help your students focus in a 50 minutes class. Okay, if you are the only one who's talking for 50 minutes, I think your students would fall asleep by then. Okay, so you need to engage them by showing videos, okay, by showing some graphic images like posters and so on, and newspapers or magazines, okay, for real world context, and humor, those are jokes. Okay, so it helps the students to focus. Now, for example, if you're teaching problem solving, the teacher demonstrates how to use Paul Ya's 1957 four-step problem-solving strategy and models thinking aloud to make visible the thinking processes. While explaining and demonstrating, the teacher also probes students' understanding of the process by asking questions and giving feedback to the students who respond to the questions. So this is a question answer type of lesson where your students will need to be able to think abstractly, like they need to be at formal operational stage, not at concrete operational stage, because they are not able to give you answers beyond what they see. But if you just want answers from what they are doing, or from activities that they are doing, then yes, okay, you can use this. Now, Paul Ya, 1957, created his famous four-step process for problem solving, which is used all over to aid people in problem solving. So here are the 4 steps. Step 1, understand the problem. Step 2, devise a plan. What plan? How are you planning to solve the problem? Okay. Step 3, carry out the plan. That means you will solve the problem. And then step 4, look back, or you check to see if the problem has been solved. If not, go back to step 1, okay, step 2, and step 3. Now, teachers also use students' response to modify the explanation and demonstration so that students are better able to follow the process. So teachers use additional examples if necessary and assign work for students to do on the spot. Now, teachers check on students' work and selectively pick a few responses for further discussion. During lesson closure, the teacher reviews the key learning points of the lesson to consolidate the learning. So you see, every single point here begins with the word teacher. Now, it's not wrong for you to use direct instruction. You can use direct instruction if you are pressing for time. If you are pressed for time, that means that you don't have the time, you have to finish the syllabus, the final exam is coming. Then you can use direct instruction. But I can tell you, out of that 100% of knowledge that you give to your students, sorry about the noise. Okay, out of the 100% of the lesson that you give to your students on that day, about maybe 50 understand, and maybe 45% only are able to understand what you see. Okay, so between 45 to 50% of your students will be able to understand. Okay, alright, so we finish with the engagement phase. So we are now in mastery phase. So what is mastery phase? Okay, so mastery phase is the final phase of learning, where teachers actually help students consolidate. That means, like, for example, summarize, okay, and extend their learning. Extend their learning here could be giving them extended activity. Okay, some of the students, they dislike the word homework, okay, because it has a negative connotation. So instead of homework, we change it to extended activity. So it's like the activity that you did in class right now, and then we are extending it, so you bring it home and you carry it out at home. Okay, so the mastery approach will include motivated practice, reflective review, and extended learning. Okay, so these are the 3 items found under mastery. So let's have a look at them. So under mastery, we have motivated practice. Now, in motivated practice, students need practice to achieve mastery, and practice can be motivating and fun. So this is when you actually design the activity. Okay, so you design a fun and motivating activity. Motivating here means that something that is age related, and that it makes it fun to learn maths. Okay, don't use something that comes from the 1950s maths textbook. Okay, so practice must also include repetition, variation to achieve proficiency, and flexibility. So the main aim in doing motivated practice is to achieve proficiency and to achieve flexibility. Okay, now in your motivated practice, you should have repetition. Repetition here means questions or something that they do more than once, so that it enhances retention. Okay, it enhances retention so that it stays in the long-term memory longer. Alright, variation. So that means your questions must not be only one style, but your questions actually vary. Even though your questions looks different, they are testing the same thing. For example, questions on area. You can have different questions where students are asked to calculate area. Okay, it could be the area of a house, it could be an area of a shop lot, it could be the area of a playground, etc., etc. Okay. Now, structuring practice in the form of games is one good strategy. Students like games, kids like games, teenagers like games. So if you can come up with a game for that particular practice, topic practice, then yeah, that is a good strategy. Okay, it makes practice motivating and fun, and allowing for repetition and variation. If you have played if you have played an online game, you would know that to reach a certain level, you have to try again and again and again. So that is the repetition. Variation means that to reach there, you have to, for example, solve some form of mathematical problem, which leads to the solving of the actual problem. Now, there should be a range of activities from simple recall of facts to application of concepts. Okay. Next is reflective review. The second one is reflective review. So for reflective review, it is important that students consolidate and deepen their learning through tasks that allow them to reflect on their learning. So anyway, the name is reflective review. So students will need to summarize and reflect. Okay, so this is a good habit that needs to be cultivated from an early age, and it supports the development of metacognition. Now, summarizing their learning using concept maps or mind maps, writing journals to reflect on their learning, and making connections between mathematical ideas and between mathematics and other subjects should be encouraged. Okay, so like for example, I did ask you to do exit sleep. This is a form of reflection. Okay, so if you have done exit sleep for the past 10 weeks, 13 weeks, then you have revised the topics. Okay, sharing such reflections through blogs makes learning social. That means if you write your exit sleep in the form of a blog, then others would actually comment and so on. So it's a social, it's a learning social. Okay. Now the last is extended learning. This is where students who are mathematically inclined should have opportunities to extend their learning. That means if these students are very good in maths, you can give them more challenging problems, situations, or case studies so that they can solve the problem. They bring it at home, they bring it to their home, or they can solve it in class, because they will be doing the rest of the mathematical problems very quickly. Okay, so we do not want students not doing anything in our class, and we don't want students who get bored in class either. Now this can be in the form of more challenging tasks that stretch their thinking and deepen their understanding. Now until this part, I think you might be thinking that if I have a mixed ability class, I will need to come up with, let's say, 3 exercises. Okay, one is for the high flyers. That means it's very challenging. The other one is moderate. That means it's not too challenging. And the last one will be simple. Simple for those who are academically inclined. Okay, so yes, you have to do this, but it's not isolated. That means it's not like, okay, you do challenging and then set it aside. No, actually all three levels, okay, levels will be in the same piece of paper. Only you know which one is simple, which one is moderate, and which one is actually more challenging. So if your students who are fast learners, they will be doing everything. But if your student is a moderate or average student, he or she will manage to answer a few questions where those are moderate type of questions. And those who are academically declined, academically challenged students, they will be able to answer the simple part, okay, but they will have trouble to get to this level. Okay, this is where you can help, okay, by explaining to them about the moderate type of questions. Okay, so we have finished with readiness, engagement, and mastery learning phases. So let's look at the type of lesson plans. We have several types that our students have used over the years. The first one will be the School of Education's lesson plan template, which consists of the 3 phases of learning: readiness, engagement, and mastery. Then we have the 5E lesson plan template. 5E stands for engage, explore, explain, elaborate, and evaluate. Okay, so you might be learning about the 5E lesson plan in other modules, because in this module we only use the School of Education lesson plan. Now there is another one called STEM lesson plan template. STEM stands for science, okay, technology, engineering, and mathematics and maths. Okay, so their lesson plan is slightly different. And you can see an example here where I've already put in the link, so you can have a look at it. And other types of lesson plan, depending on what lesson plan your future school will be using. In Nexus Putrajaya, they use IPC. So their lesson plan is slightly different from the normal or the common lesson plan. Okay, assessment, role of assessment, range of assessment. So we have done this in the tutorial class, where you have looked at assessment for learning, assessment of learning, and assessment as learning. Okay, what are the roles of assessment? Okay, so assessment drives learning. Okay, assessment drives learning, meaning to say, when you learn something, you need to be assessed, okay, so that you would be able to teach it. This is for teachers. And then teachers will use assessment so that the students actually learn something. So assessment drives learning. Okay, assessment is an integral part of the interactive process of teaching and learning. It is an ongoing process where the students gather information about students' learning to inform and support learning. An important product of assessment is feedback. Okay, so learn how to give feedback, learn how to use certain words to provide feedback. Okay, now feedback must be timely and rich. Rich here means that it gives, the feedback helps the student to build on his or her strength, and not the other way around. Okay, it must inform the students where they are in their learning and what they need to do to improve their learning. So if they are doing good at a certain level, okay, then what should they do so that they can achieve higher level? Okay, it must also inform teachers what they need to do to address learning gaps and how to improve their instruction. Okay, here's the range of assessment that you have already discussed last week. Assessment can actually be broadly classified into summative, formative, diagnostic. Okay, summative, assessment of learning. Formative is assessment for learning. Okay, diagnostic is not under any of this, because diagnostic is where you want to find out more about the student. Okay, so summative assessments such as tests and examinations measure what students have learned throughout the year. Okay, throughout the year. Now, teachers usually report the assessment result as a score or a grade. So that is summative. Now, for formative and diagnostic measurements are used to assess, used as assessment for learning. So formative is assessment for learning to provide timely feedback to students on their learning area, to teachers on their teaching. Okay, so for students, it's feedback on their learning, but for teachers, it is about how they teach. So assessment in the classroom should focus on helping students improve their learning. Okay, so the formative or assessment for learning should be an indicator or an indication of how well a student is in certain topics and which topics that they need help in. Therefore, they are primarily formative and diagnostic in purpose. Okay, though teachers are comfortable with the use of traditional pen and paper tests to find out how much students know and can do, now this is value, there is value in exploring a wider variety of arrangement strategies. Now, these strategies actually will allow teachers to gather information or data that is not easily available through traditional methods of assessment, but are available to support learning nowadays. Ultimately, the choice of assessment strategies must be guided by its purpose. Okay, so if you choose to use formative assessment, which is assignment as learning, assessment for learning, for example, okay, there must be a purpose to why you want to have that kind of assessment. So you need to justify. Okay, that is, it must be fit for purpose. Right, let's have a look at integrating assessment with instruction. That means you are putting the assessment, you are putting the assessment into your instruction or into your lesson plan. Okay. So, for example, if you have your instruction for readiness, okay, students should be able to do this, or students will be watching a video, etc. So those are instruction in your lesson plan. Now you need to integrate the assessment into that instruction of yours. Now, one way for you to do that is to question your students. So you have to use effective questioning technique. Now, if you are able to use effective questioning, that means you are scaffolding the learning and you are probing into what they have understood during your lesson. Okay? So, how to question correctly is something that you need to master and you need to know how to do. Okay, use Bloom's revised taxonomy verbs, right, to form your questions. Like, for example, how do you explain what happened when you use a ruler to measure the table? So that is a probing question. Then your students will need to answer and then they need to explain. Okay, so This will create teachable moments for teachers. Teachable moments means that this is the moment where you would be able to identify whether there is a misconception. Sorry about that, that's the ambulance. Okay, for teachers to find if there are any misconceptions and to correct that misconception, or to reinforce, okay, a point, meaning to say that that is a very important point, but you don't tell them that's a very important point. They realize it themselves during your teaching, or to expand on an idea. Questions, there are two types of questions. Now this is one type which we call as open-ended question. The other one is called closed questions. Okay, closed questions are normally MCQ, multiple choice question, where you have A, B, C, D. But open-ended questions is where your students will need to think, and they might come up with alternative approaches to solve the mathematical problem. Now this is important. Wait time is necessary. Okay, now sufficient wait time normally is 30 seconds. When you ask your students a question, you need to wait 30 seconds before asking any of them to answer the questions. So you need to count 30 seconds slowly, not aloud. Okay, so you pose a question and then you just wait. So the students at that point, what they will do is that they will be able to formulate their thoughts, meaning that they will start thinking, because they know you are waiting for the answers and you are not giving the answers to them. Okay, and they need to communicate with each other if they are doing this in a group, and then they share their ideas and they hear ideas from others in the group. So after the 30 seconds is up, then you call, okay, group 1, can you give me the answer to that question? Then they are ready to give you the answers. Now some teachers, they give questions to their students, and I think they just wait for 1 second and then they give the answer. Okay, that way the students just didn't have time to think, they didn't have time to process the question, and they didn't even have time to find ways to solve that question. Okay, so please wait for 30 seconds before the students answer your question. Now in the process, students will learn to articulate their thinking. Now when they are so used to you asking questions and waiting for them to answer, they will immediately know that they need to think. So they will start thinking, they will start telling others what they think, and also deepen their understanding by listening to others, and develop confidence in talking. Okay, and talking about mathematics and using mathematical language. That will give them confidence. Not asking question and the next second you actually answer the question. So that way your students are not going to think. They're just going to sit there and say, oh, my teacher is going to give me the answer just in 1 second. Okay, now teachers can assess students' thinking and understanding and provide useful feedback to improve their learning. Again, the word feedback. Okay, so you need to learn how to give proper feedback, constructive and positive feedback. Okay, teachers can integrate performance assessment. Okay, performance assessment into the instructional process. This will provide additional learning experiences for students. Integrate performance assessment will need the use of a rubric. Okay, so a rubric, right? Okay, we go to point 2 first. So the type of assessment requires students to apply their knowledge and skills in context That means in different scenarios or in different situations, so that they are able to apply what they learn, assess the situation, and then solve the problem, right? And the focus is on mathematical processes rather than the content. So the processes here is what we used to call as the working. Okay, so that way, whenever they face a question, whenever they face a problem, they will use the mathematical skills that they get in your class to assess the situation and to find ways to solve the problem. That means they will go through step by step the working of it or the process of it until they solve the problem. Okay, now this type of assessment, performance assessment, okay, will need to use a rubric. The rubric like the ones that I showed you for assignment 1 and assignment 2. Okay, now in this rubric, it will show teachers what to look for in students' work. Okay, whether it's their communication skills, okay, what is excellent, what is fair, and what is good, and what is zero. Okay, and importantly, it shows what is expected of the students in terms of processes and quality of work. Now, this kind of rubric also provides a structured means of giving qualitative feedback. So by looking at the rubric, the students would know that, okay, they are at the middle, for example, and the statement there in the rubric tells them that maybe some of the items in their performance assessment could be improved on. Okay, teachers may allow students to assess their own performances so that they can reflect on their own work and make improvements. Okay, make improvements. Okay, another one is assessment for learning. Calls for new ways of assessment in the classroom. Assessment for learning, another name for it will be formative. Okay, formative assessment. Alright, and it involves a change in teachers' roles and in the expectations of students. So by integrating assessment and instruction, students will be more engaged in and will take greater ownership of their learning. Okay, so you need to integrate assessment into your instruction. So your activities are not just merely activities, but they are actually a way for you to assess whether your students are able to understand what they learn in that particular lesson that you taught them in that day. Okay, so I will stop here and continue with part 2 for scheme of work.